Okay, hello there, and welcome to the Fox Den. Nistu Anagok Biksipidaki. I am Andrea Truejoy Fox, your host for Talks with a Fox. I'm happy you have joined me on this colorful adventure of self discovery and lifelong learning. Throughout my journey, I have met some amazing human beings who are living inspirational and intentional lives as they fulfill their purpose and share their gifts with the world. I am excited to share these conversations with you, as well as some stories from my life as a Blackfoot woman, Nitsitabyaki, and as a teacher and artist who is navigating through this exciting and beautiful world we live in, challenges and all. So grab a tea or coffee and get ready to feel inspired as you reflect on your own exciting journey and your connection to the world. We are in this together, and there is so much for us to learn and share. Let's do this. I just want to thank you for following this wonderful journey and for connecting with Talks with the Fox on all of our social media and liking and commenting on our page. We appreciate all the inquiries that we have received regarding how you can further support Talks with the Fox podcast. So we have gone ahead and set up a Patreon account where you can subscribe and support the podcast. Feel free to go to patreon.com/Talks with a Fox podcast. There's also a link to the Patreon page on our Buzzsprout page where you can donate the amount of your choosing. It means so much to me that you are on this journey with us. Okay, idamik I have a very special guest here who is an award-winning Indigenous writer, artist, and educator. She is a graduate of the UBC Creative Writing MFA program, and her work was longlisted for the 2018 Edna Stabler Personal Essay. She has also won several other awards, and she has a new book that is out. And I just have to say how much I love this book. I just recently picked it up and it's already marked up, which usually means it's a very good read for me because I can't put it down. And I bookmarked several items in there that we're going to discuss today. With that said, I am so happy and excited to introduce my friend and colleague, Francine Cunningham. Good morning,
Hi,
Francine.
good morning.
How are you?
I'm doing wonderful. It's a great day. A
It
really
is a
great day.
beautiful day.
It is. Blue
Yes,
sky. What more do you need?
exactly. Well, first of all, I just want to thank you for coming on to the show. I know you have been busy as usual, with your writing as well as creating your ever so beautiful designs, your jewelry, which I most recently made a purchase last month. And I have to say, those are my most recent favorite earrings, pair of beaded earrings. I love them.
Thank you. That's amazing. I love hearing that. I love beading. It's so fun. It's one of the things I do in the evening to wind down for the day.
Wow, that is a beautiful way to just, yeah, wrap up your day and relax. And I'm sure
It
it's
is.
also very therapeutic.
Oh yeah, my cookum was a beater, and so she taught me, and then she always used to say like it's your time where you can just like let go of the world, you can let go of like any family problems, like anything. Is all you have to do is focus on just like laying down the next bead, and that's it, and your world becomes nice and small. Yeah,
So grandmothers always know what they're talking about, and that wisdom that they share with us, we hang on to tightly.
yeah, we do, and she's right.
Okay, so a little backstory here for our lovely listeners. You and I met back in February of 2020. So, wow, has gone by because it's already August.
Yeah, Yeah, it feels just like a few months ago, but I guess it's been closer to 6 now,
Oh
maybe
my
more.
gosh, that's right. Yeah.
Back
When
when
I
the
think
world was
of,
still open.
yes, if only we knew what was going to happen.
Oh man.
Wow.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
Yeah.
so we met at the Bounce Center at one of their media arts residencies. And I remember just how much you lit up the room with your smile, your beautiful smile, and your warm, friendly demeanor, and you were very welcoming to everyone. And we had some wonderful conversations, and so
Yeah.
that is why I'm just so happy we've been able to stay in touch, and we've had a couple of Zoom calls, and
Yeah.
it's been great. And yeah, I'm just so excited to talk to you today and
Yeah.
hear some thoughts on your book On Me, which is
Yeah.
a compilation of poetry,
Hmm.
beautiful poems, beautiful stories intertwined in here, and there's so much richness. But before I get into that, I
Hmm.
just want to ask you, where did it all begin for you, for Francine? I know you're Métis and Cree, and you were
Yeah.
raised in Alberta with your
Hmm.
family.
Hmm. Yeah, I was raised in Calgary and Edmonton. Um, and my family, so on my mother's side, they come from the Saddle Lake Reserve, which is in Alberta. And then my dad, he's Métis, and his family sort of comes from the Slave Lake area. Um, but yeah, so that's sort of like where I was born. But in terms of my like art career, or my life as an artist, I started out always knowing that I really wanted to be an artist. I was never really interested in anything else in school. Like that, just nothing really did it for me. And the only school I ever got, like, or the only classes I ever got 100% in were the art classes. I struggled really hard through high school. I never actually made it past grade 9 math or science. I just couldn't do it. Um, but I spent all of high school focusing on creating a portfolio because I really thought that my life was going to be in the visual arts. I was going to be a painter. Um, that's sort of the thing I really wanted to do. But then when I graduated from high school, I decided to take a year off to sort of really make sure that's what I wanted. Um, and in that year, I actually found theater. And because I spent a lot of my time just in the public library, just reading everything I could. And I came across the like play section, which I'd never really read plays before, except for just a few Shakespeare's in high school. And I read this play by Faust, and I was like, oh my God. And so I like immediately went on the internet and I was like, how to become an actor. And they said the best thing to do is go to theater school. So a few months later, I auditioned for theater school, and I think they had like 500 people audition, and they let 12 of us in. And so I was like, oh, maybe I'm actually good at this, even though I'd never done it before. And so then I did 2 years of theater school. And when I moved to Vancouver to do my Bachelor of Arts, I did it in theater. But during that Bachelor of Arts, I started to take a lot of writing classes because writing was also something I'd done my whole life, but I didn't think that it was like the thing I was most precious about and the thing I was most afraid to share with people, which in hindsight means it was the thing I was most supposed to do. And so I took some writing classes, and when I finally showed, I remember the first class, I took this class, it was called Writing with an Indigenous Focus, and it was all Indigenous people around the table, and it was run by Richard Van Camp, the writer.
Wow.
And yeah, it was my first time like sitting at a writing table, and I remember I was so nervous, and I showed them my poems, and everybody at the table was just so supportive that it really made me feel like, oh my gosh, like, no, I can actually do the thing that I secretly have always wanted to do. And so I graduated from my BA, and then I sort of moved into an MFA, and I spent 4 years really working on craft and how to actually make a story work, and on both the broad level and the sentence level. And I worked with some really amazing mentors and some really amazing writers. And then I graduated 5 years ago, and since then I've just been working as a professional artist. And I've since been able to sort of bring back my visual art element of my life. Um, I've let go of the theater part, but I'm now just do visual art, creative writing, and then teaching because I've always loved to teach.
Mm-hmm. Okay,
Yeah.
so isn't that how it works? I just want to go back to what you said when, you thought life would take you this way, and then lo and behold, here we are a few book awards later. And but doesn't life work that way, where
Yeah.
but we have a plan or an idea of what we want to do, and you know, sometimes it works out greatly, sometimes it works out perfect in the sense of our plan, but most often, it's full of some surprises. And just following your career here, you have accomplished so much already. And it's beautiful that you were able to really tap into that gift of yours through the literary arts, and to have, a mentor like Richard Van Camp and be around other Indigenous writers. How do you feel how do you feel, how important is it for Indigenous artists to work amongst their peers or to have that mentorship from their peers?
Oh, it's the most important. I mean, when I was doing my MFA, I was the only I was the only Indigenous person in my cohort, um, for the like because they let in a different cohort every year, and you sort of are with those people for your 4 years. So I think I was the only one in my year, and the stuff I was writing for them, it was almost like I had to separate my writing, and so I was like writing for. It's gonna sound terrible, but writing for like a white audience, and
Mm-hmm.
then keeping the other stuff for myself. Anything that sort of dealt with my own Indigenous identity, because I just felt like nobody would understand in that group. And after having had 3 years of sitting around a table with a bunch of Indigenous writers where I could share anything, it was just a little bit different where I just sort of had to separate that myself for those years. And then I went to the BAM Center for an Indigenous writing studio, and we worked with Richard Wagamese before he passed. And oh my gosh, that guy was probably the most natural storyteller I've ever met in my entire life. I would say one in a million. And he really just opened up that part again for me. And sitting around again in a room with a bunch of Indigenous writers just really, really helped me like hold on to why I'm doing this. And then since then, I've made sure that that's a huge part of my writing practice, and is to be able to connect with my own community and make sure that my writing is sort of serving my own community. Um, so it's incredibly important, and especially to have those mentorships. I mean, like Eden Robinson kindly was the second reader on my thesis, so she sort of signed off on it and said I was able to graduate because you need two people to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So having her wisdom come onto my thesis project was incredible, and just I've just been very blessed to be able to have some of these incredible writers sort of mentor their early beginnings of my career.
That is so beautiful and such an important part of the process of getting started. And like you had said, as an Indigenous artist, there, as we know, there are many barriers and challenges that we face as artists. And then you add in being Indigenous. But I see you just navigating so gracefully and thriving. And you are now mentoring other young artists. I see the work that you have been doing with the youth. I've heard the stories from you on when we visited back in February in Banff, but I've
Yeah.
also seen your work on your webpage as well. Can you tell me about that process, connecting with the youth? I mean, it's my understanding you go into the different communities and
Yeah.
you participate in different artist residencies.
Yeah. It's like the number one joy of my life, I would say, outside of writing, is being able to teach, and especially being able to teach in community. It is amazing. I started working with youth probably around over 10 years ago. Before, when I was still in school, I was working with a lot of urban Indigenous youth. And at that time, it was really great for me because that's how I was raised. I was raised urban. And so I had a lot of connection with these youth. I found sitting around, no matter how many tables I sat around with the different cohorts of youth, it was always sort of the same themes would come out over and over and over again, which is one reason why I wrote this book in particular. But a lot of the themes were of like feeling isolated, feeling alienated from their identity, feeling like they didn't belong, just a lot of pain, a lot of shame for not speaking their language, for just not having what the broader Canadian society would consider like the Indigenous experience. You know, they grew up in the city instead of the res, and just feeling a lot of feelings about that. And I know those feelings because I also experienced those exact feelings. So it really helped me to sit around with those youth and to help them express what they needed to express and let them know that everything that they felt and was valid, and the best thing for them to do is to write about it and to talk about it with each other, to know that they are not alone. They actually have a huge community. um, and so one of the reasons I wrote this book was for youth, and because even when I go into community, um, and I'm sitting around with kids who have been raised in tradition and culture, and are surrounded by their language all the time or even speak it, they still they still have a lot of the same feelings of like lost identity, of not knowing who they are, of not feeling
Hmm.
good enough or not feeling like Indian enough or whatever. And so I still find that those same sentiments are there. And so I really just feel like whatever I can do to help them express that and sort of get that outside of them, um, is, I don't know, it's just it's what I can do on this earth. And I always feel like we all have different roles, and not all of our roles are the same. And so for me personally, I have a lot of social anxiety, so I can't be one of the people who go to the rallies and stand on the front line and be surrounded by all those crowds. That's not my place. But my place is sitting around with a group of 12 or 15 kids and really just helping them talk through what they're feeling. And so just really coming to terms with like what my role is in our world. And also being able to write books for them.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you articulated it so well, because I think sometimes we get caught up, in the sense of, as Indigenous artists and leaders, we get caught up in the feeling of, well, I need to be out here doing this, or this is how my leadership or my contribution to my community should look. But really, I love that you have tapped into what works best for you. And not only that, but you're drawing from your gifts, and that's how you are giving back to the communities, and putting forward that activism. Activism can look like so many things. It's not necessarily protesting. It's simply even just living and existing as Indigenous
Yeah.
people, because we have been through a lot, and we have
Yeah.
survived a lot. And not only surviving but thriving. I love to
Yeah.
see our people thrive, and you are doing so many wonderful things. And there's so much ahead for you. I can't wait to see what you do next. um, but I want to go back to how you mentioned this book, and
Mhm.
the connection to the youth. I just love in your acknowledgments. Those are one of my favorite parts to read when somebody has written a book. Or, I love to see who was there in their process. I love hearing about it in their acknowledgments. And you so beautifully articulate that. I'm just going to quote it if you're okay with that.
Yeah, for sure.
To any Indigenous youth out there who may be reading this, you matter, and these words are for you. I hope that if you're struggling, you'll do the same and try writing about all that you're feeling. Writing always helps. And you're so right. You're so, writing is so healing and therapeutic. And I hear and see that in your work. Um, I mean, I'm looking at as I was reading your book, there's so many incredible, deeply profounding themes that are so beautifully interwoven here. I mean, you're talking about some very personal, but also some very important topics and things that we as human beings sometimes struggle with or endure and also celebrate. So, a few themes that have jumped out are grief. You know, we have lost so many people in our communities and our families. And I love how you express that in here. There's one where you're talking about your mom and,
Mhm.
the process of her moving into the next world. But that process, the pain that you felt, and yet it's so beautiful the way you write about it and express yourself.
Yeah, that was definitely like after my mom passed, I was filled with, well, I mean, if you've read the book, I was filled with a lot of like rage right at the beginning because of the failure of our medical system and how it treats Indigenous people. And I feel like that was a huge contributing factor. And so I
Mm-hmm.
was filled with a lot of rage for a while. It took me about a year to be able to actually write about it until I could sort of like
Mm-hmm.
settle those feelings. I spent about a year writing to her before I could even write poems about it. Um, so I wrote letters to her, and that sort of like helped bring me through the initial grief process. So yeah, again, writing helps.
Absolutely. And um, my condolences to you. My heart goes out to you, Francine, for the loss of your mom. Um, I'm sorry to, hear about that and read about it through here. And you are such a strong, powerful woman. And it's amazing that you're able to pull from that pain and um, manifest it into something healing and beautiful. And I know that others who have read your book and who will be reading your book, they will be able to find their own connections and their own way of reflection on how they are working through their grief. Um, and so thank you for sharing that. That's personal and powerful.
I didn't quite realize at the time of writing this book about how personal it actually was. It didn't hit me until about a month after I published it, actually, that I was struck with a moment of panic where I realized, oh my gosh, I shared so much of myself with the world, and you can't, and once you share yourself, you can't take it back, right? And
Hmm.
so I was like, oh my gosh, everybody's going to know everything about me and they're going to judge me. And I just,
So you had very gracefully. I love the way you talk about grief in a very graceful and yet truthful way. And I mean, you had shared, once it's out there, once you're putting it out there about yourself, it's out there to the world. How do you work with that? How do you feel about that? Because you ultimately are sharing very deep and personal parts of yourself with people.
yeah. So like I might have mentioned, it was scary, really scary at first. And I went into like a hibernation from the world, like kind of off social media and stuff for a few months after my book came out when I sort of had that realization. But then the messages started to come in from people about how much my book meant to them and how much specific poems meant to them. And that sort of brought me out of that and just reminded me of my purpose and why I do what I'm doing. But it was also a very good lesson for the future. Um, so for future books that I come out, I now have more of like the actual reality of what publishing is. I don't know, and I think also because I'm older now, I was younger when I wrote this book. Um, so I think just with like age, um, I just realized some realities of the world, and so some of my other books, I may decide to keep some stuff for myself, which I think is also very important.
That's beautiful. I couldn't agree with you more on that. Yeah, I mean, you're hearing when you hear people, telling their life stories, or when I've heard people share their stories, I've always thought in the back of my mind, it's great if we can also keep parts of ourselves for ourselves. And I just love how you articulated that. Um, and then you have your your family as well. Is that something that you consider when you're writing, because you have your family, your father, you
I
have a sister, is that right?
have a couple sisters, yeah.
A couple sisters, yes. So are you thinking of them when you're also writing? Like, okay, if I write this, how do I think they'll respond, or do you just write and then think of those things after?
Well, I just when it's for me, when I'm just doing it on my own computer or whatever, I just write. I just don't censor myself. I just let it all out. But then when it comes to thinking about what I'm going to share with the world, yeah, I consult them, especially if they come up in the poem or if it's a theme about our past or something. Um, but I mean, I've had conversations with my dad, with my sisters, with my grandmother, and they've all said the same thing. Like, it's your truth, it's your story, it's your perception or your lived experience of what happened, and so that is totally valid. And if it differs from our perception, our things, then we can write about and tell our side of it if we feel like it. Um, but just basically like telling me just to write what I feel is correct and true and not to worry about them.
How incredible is that? I mean, I would think that's a healing process for you as a family in itself, where you are talking about things, or, maybe through your writing, it's sparking these very thoughtful conversations and connections with your immediate family.
Yeah.
I believe that in our communities, that's where we are looking at our healing processes, is through talking about things in our families, so we can heal from things that have happened and moved forward together through that, and feel the pain sometimes together, and talk about those uncomfortable things, or things that maybe have been buried beneath the surface for so long. And I think you just sharing this is going to be very insightful for our listeners too, who are on that their own healing journey and with their families.
Yeah, and I think when it comes to conversations like that, the most important thing you got to remember is no one has to be right. There is no right, and there is no wrong, right? Because everybody perceives the situation differently, and so you cannot get angry at someone else for perceiving the situation you're both in, um, from their life experience, right? Because you bring everything you've gone through, you bring with it into that moment. And it's not what anybody else in that circle or whoever you're talking with has gone through. So it's just, I think that just getting away from the idea that someone has to be right and it has to be you, um, that helps open it up, the conversation.
Well, I just think that the way you explain that is very telling of who you are as a woman, and as an artist, and as an educator. It's your whole approach to things. And I remember feeling that way when I did myself and then other artist in the residency where we met in February, where you were very nurturing and you guided us through a writing exercise, and you were confident in the way you taught, and you were open to our ideas and our curiosities. And I believe that's a gift that you have. And it makes me feel really great as a fellow teacher here, knowing that you are sharing that gift with people, and especially our youth. You've done some amazing work with our youth. What are some things that you would tell them to help prepare them for life after high school, because you had that university, or,
Hmm.
after life after high school experience, whether they go on to university,
Hmm.
college, or trades, or just moving out of their house with their family and growing up. What are some words of wisdom you have shared or would share with them?
I would say take it slow. You don't have to rush. I feel like if you rush, you might make the wrong decision. I decided to take a year off, and that was the best thing for me to do, to really, really think about it. Because especially when it comes to something like if you're deciding to go to a school or a trade or whatever, that's you're making an agreement to put in a lot of time and a lot of money and a lot of your life towards that, and it should be what you actually want to do, and it shouldn't be something that you feel rushed to do. Um, and it shouldn't be something that you feel obliged to do. It's your life, and you shouldn't let other people dictate it. Um, so I would say to slow down a little bit and take some time to really consider what you want to do, and also know that it can change and that's okay, and it probably will change. Um, but just to never feel, I don't know, committed, I guess you should say, like committed to something that doesn't feel right. If it really doesn't feel right, then just stop doing it. Um, I mean, I would say that for anybody of any age, even if you're in your 50s and you've had a job forever and it's made you feel really bad for a really long time. Just because you've put in so many years doesn't mean you're stuck there. You can change if you want to. Um, Yeah, I don't know. Does that is that good?
Of course. I mean, I'm just sitting here thinking, okay, Francine, where were you when I was 17? I graduated from high school at 17. I was not ready for the world,
Yeah,
and my plans originally were to go into university. I had the 5-year plan and
yeah,
talked it over with my parents, and of course they supported me, but when it came down to it, I just wasn't ready. I
yeah,
was, I always felt like I was a year younger than my peers and trying to play catch up with them. And so then I went to college, and that was quite an adventure in itself.
mhm,
And, but yeah, my parents gave me that space to just figure things out as I went along the way. And
yeah,
I love how you talk about not having to, if you commit to something, but life happens, and
yeah,
or we discover ourselves and we find out, what, this just isn't working for me anymore, or this really isn't what I feel passionate about.
yeah,
And I think we need to give our young people more of that empowerment so they can give themselves that permission, if anything, to say, this isn't working for me, or this doesn't feel right.
yeah.
Um, I think that even comes along with relationships, being in unhealthy relationships, or
Oh yeah,
being in unhealthy situations.
yeah. Unhealthy friendships too. I think that's something that really doesn't get talked about a lot, especially with youth in high school and stuff. Just like just as much as you can have an abusive romantic relationship, you can have abusive friendships. And oftentimes, I feel like friendships are deeper and longer, and they just last longer than romantic relationships. You can have a friend who's your friend for 30, 40 years, um, or maybe you're only with a guy or a girl for 5. So, but also just recognizing, yeah, you can have friendships that maybe need to fall away, and that's okay. Also,
Well, you really do have the ability to support young people in their thought processes and the way they're coming to understand the world around them. I also wanted to, okay, so now switching gears a little
hmm
bit here, I wanted to talk about your teaching experience now working with adults, and
hmm
you've been faculty at in different art programs.
hmm
And by the way, without knowing who you were, we all didn't know who each other was when we went into our residency. And the first day, I remember we were sitting in a circle, and everyone was sitting there, and the faculty are talking, and then they're getting ready for us to go around and introduce ourselves, and basically state if we were an artist or if we were faculty. And I remember just looking around the room and kind of trying to play the guessing game. Okay, this person is probably an artist, and this person I think is faculty, and I thought you were faculty.
That's
Yeah,
great.
just, but I mean that in, in such a wonderful complimentary way, like just the way you carry yourself. And, like I said, you have that nurturing ability, which for me, in my eyes as a teacher, every person who decides to go into any teaching work needs to be a nurturer, because you are ultimately taking care of people in your care,
Yeah.
whether they're adults or children. So
Yeah.
anyways, I just wanted to share that little tidbit with you there.
That's funny. Probably because I've done so many residencies at the BAM Center. So I feel very like comfortable there. So
Yeah, well, I mean, okay, so you've been faculty.
yeah.
Tell me about your experiences teaching and working with adults.
Oh man, it is both similar and completely different than working with youth, and I absolutely love it. Um, I've worked in with adult ed programs, so typically with adults who are upgrading from high school into sort of like wanting to get their GEDs, who never had the chance to graduate high school when they were youth, and so getting to work with them, it's so different because the conversations we have are much different as a group, and we can have like these very deep conversations where they're teaching me a ton because they have a lot of times way more life experience than I do, and so the stories they're sharing are just so funny and rich and just filled with like a lot of knowledge that I really enjoy. And I find it's sort of strange, but when I work with youth on teaching, like a lot of their writing tends to be more fantastical and much more like dystopian or sci-fi or fantasy. But when I work with adults, a lot of their stories, they just want to like tell their own story and their own life experience, or talk about some of their family members that have passed on or some stories they heard when they were kids. And it's much more like grounded in the real. So that's like a huge difference that I notice. And I love either or, they're both great. Um, but I have had experience also with working with elders, which is just such a gift. But helping them sort of tell their stories and record their stories, and I sort of walk through different writing exercises, which I find are very helpful. Like almost like guided meditation, but like guided writing prompts. And because I find like a lot of people are like auditory. So if I hand just like a classroom, a handout that's like paragraphs, that's like, okay, write about this, write about that, that's just not as stimulating or as accessible as if instead, like I like to be, we sort of sit in a circle and I like to actually like guide them step by step with my voice. So like look around the room and describe what you're doing here and what was the sound that was happening. So just like more, um, yeah, walking them through a little bit differently. So I find that works for both youth and adults, but adults seem to get a lot out of it. And the thing I realize about adults is a lot of times they don't have the time or the ability, or not the ability, the time, or almost like the permission. I find like adults need permission to be creative a lot of the time. Like they feel like it's not serious enough, like it's not work, so they need to be focusing on work. And being creative is just something that people do when they have a lot of time. But so I find like just me, the active me sitting in that room, giving them permission to be creative, sort of like opens them up in a way. And I find like a lot of times there's like an emotional, like cathartic release. Um, and a lot of my workshops with adults sort of end with some people just like letting go of some tears and sort of letting go of some things that have been bottled up for a long time. And so that's sort of a cool thing about working with adults. Yeah.
That's very interesting how you talk about the way student learners and adult learners, the commonalities and then the differences. And I can relate, having taught youth and adults. And I 100% support you on that guided writing. When I experienced that with you, I found it to be very interactive. I felt yeah, like you didn't just, okay, here's your writing exercise. Now go into a corner and write. Pull out some deep stuff or profound things.
Yeah.
um, but instead you guided us through it, me and Ellie, and it was really special, a special moment that we shared, the three of us. And I liked how you gave us enough time to write, and then you pulled us a little bit back in, and we had time to kind of stop for a moment and then start again. And then I like how you talk. I find it really important that you do talk about the way adults, we tend to, yes, we get stuck, we get really caught up in that, well, basically, what am I doing with my time?
Yeah.
Is this of value to my time? And is this, am I doing something with my time that is of value and is responsible? And,
Hmm.
otherwise I should be doing this, and that guilt or that not living in the present. And you, with your guided writing exercises, you allow the adults to feel present and to remain connected, and you do it in a very nurturing way that allows us to also feel as writers that we are community. We are
Yeah.
part of community. It's not that isolated experience. And especially as Indigenous people, it's just in us to want to feel connected to each other and not have those isolated experiences. And in this case, with writing, I also think that's so incredible and so essential to allowing ourselves to bring out our most meaningful work.
Yeah. I would totally agree. Yeah. And I also think like time for a lot of adults has been like commodified and has turned into like a currency, which is just really sad. And it's just like a reflection of the state of like our capitalist world, really. But when you get to a point where your time is money, and that saying, people always say that, like time is money, and I just feel like that's what brings in the guilt. And that's what, like, well, I can't take this 10 minutes even to just like explore this fantasy world in my imagination. Whether or not you're writing it, you could just be sitting on the couch and just closing your eyes for 10 minutes. But, because then you think, well, how is this going to make me money? And I just feel like
Mm.
that's such a sad state of our world. Um, Time is not money. Like, time doesn't even exist, really. So, yeah. Yeah.
Wow, I'm always just intrigued listening to you, and you get my imagination going, and that's one of my philosophies as a teacher is, we need to remember to play
Hmm.
while we are, busy supporting that in young learners. We also need to remember that as well. And writing is such a beautiful avenue to bringing back our inner child and allowing our imagination to thrive.
Yeah, like I love just sitting down with my nieces and nephews and just like not just like not writing it, but just like crafting these like worlds, like world building, just out loud. Just be like, okay, well, there's like a mountain over there. All right, well, there's a dragon over here, and the dragon has this type of power. Oh my gosh, where's the dragon's friends? And then just like creating a story. And I feel like that's so intuitive to kids, and they just do that constantly. And I love to do that all the time with them. Like it stimulates me. It makes me excited, and I have fun. And it just reminds me of how much like I used to love doing that. I did that all the time as a kid, and I mean,
Hmm.
you don't have to like commodify your storytelling either, right?
Hmm.
You don't have to be like, oh, I have to get this down so I can sell it. Like it can just exist for joy reasons.
Yes. Wow. I love that, for simply for joy.
Yeah,
Yeah. I think if more adults did that or thought that way, the world really would be a different place.
yeah,
But in the meantime, for those of us out there, and there are many other wonderful, imaginative, creative adults out there who are allowing this world to also remain beautiful. And, I like to look at it that way as well. And hopefully helping those who are caught up in the rat race, if you will,
yeah,
of time is money,
yeah.
to think of it as something else,
Yeah.
as really simply experiences. We are really human beings
Yeah.
having experiences that thread, interweave to the next experience, and
Yeah.
that is our story.
That is, when I wrote, so my second collection, it's a short story collection. Um, that's going to be coming out in a couple, well, the pandemic has sort of pushed all our publishing thing dates. So it's good. It's
Hmm.
like on a to be decided, but probably in a year and a half or so. But so it's my short story collection. And in that, the whole collection, I sort of thought about the idea of like, what do we take with us when we leave? So
Mm.
and just thinking about like, well, what is it? And to me, it really came down to our choices, which then feed into our experiences. So like, what the choices that we make on this earth are the kind of the only thing we can take with us. Like, we can't take our loved ones, we can't take our money, we can't take anything we bought, we can't take time, we can't take anything. Um, but I just feel like the choices we make and the experiences those lead to, that's all we can really take, whatever lives in our brain, right? Um, And so that collection, I really wanted to like explore that in a deep way, and with a whole bunch of characters who are all presented with a moment of choice, whether it's a big one or a small one, and then just looking at the aftermath of those choices.
Oh, I can't wait to read it.
Yeah,
I am such a fan of your work, Francine. I mean, the more I think about it, and, the more time that has passed as we continue to get to know each other, I just feel so grateful to have had that time, those experiences with you in February in person, and to where we are now,
yeah,
remaining connected and just hearing about your journey. I'm just really grateful, and it's you've inspired some things in me to get back to my writing, because I've been working on a book for, I'm not going to say for how long, but now it's like I need to get it done. So thank you for the motivation, the inspiration,
good,
and the insight.
good. I'm glad. I think I also don't. You just hate that feeling of unfinished projects?
Yes.
It's just like
And the growing list.
in a growing list, like, one of the cleansing things I do is if I feel like that list is getting too long, I look at it for serious, and then I just make a decision. I make a choice about what things are just never going to happen. I have a real talk with Fran, and I'm like, okay, Fran, I know you wanted this to happen, but it's been 5 years. Take it off your list. Take it off your mind. It's not going to happen. Move on.
Oh, wow. Okay, I am going to borrow that. Yes, it's kind of like, you know how we declutter
Yeah,
and you do spring cleaning? I love that idea when it comes to your list of things, projects
yeah,
or creative projects. Okay, I'm definitely going to borrow that,
yeah,
because there are some projects that I have been pondering about, and, okay. And then you start to feel the guilt,
yep,
and then that gets heavy. And it's like, no, just focus on what you can do and what you're willing to do right now.
yeah. And it's okay just to say bye, to say goodbye to something. It'll live on in your memory.
And the best part is, not everybody has to know.
No, and that's the thing. Like, are you kidding? On my hard drive on my computer, I have like 20 like started novels, and and I could just be like, oh my gosh, I have so much to write. I have 20 novels to write. Or I could just be like, you know what? Those are really great ideas, and just leave it at that.
Wow.
Good job, Fran. You had a really great idea.
Now we had a good run.
Yeah. But let's move on to the one that I'm really excited about. And
Yes,
otherwise, you don't work on anything, right? Because you're too paralyzed.
that's true.
So,
Yes.
uh,
Wow.
because I often get asked by people, like, what is like one of your biggest advices or whatever to young writers? And like, one of the things I say is like, finish something. Um,
Mm,
That's honestly like, if you want to have like a career, like if you're just writing for cathartic reasons, whatever, that's different. But if you're writing to actually have an actual career, to make money off of it, to have it be your life, well, like, I'm sorry to say, but you're going to have to finish something. Um,
yes.
and once you finish it, you're going to have to. you're going to have to submit it somewhere. Like, your work doesn't do you any good when it comes to your career just sitting on your computer half finished. Like, it won't do you any good that way. So
Mm.
finish something. Pick one thing, just finish it, you know.
Wise words.
That's what I did. I had my thesis novel that was there. I had this short story collection. I had this poetry collection, and then I had all these 30 half started projects, and I was just like running, like just my mind was spinning, and I was always feeling like I could never do this. Like it was just felt so uncontrollable until I decided what was going to be first. I decided on the poetry collection, and I was like, no, I want this to be my first hello to the world.
Mm.
This says so much about who I am. It explains where I come from. And I just feel like especially when thinking about like an Indigenous point of view, when when you like you introduce yourself, your family, where you come from, so people can sort of know who you are, what your connections are. And so I was like, no, this book should come out first because this book is really talking about who I am, who my family is, and where I come from. And it talks about my identity. And so if people have any questions about who I am or whatever, I'm like, you can just read the book. I put it out there as honestly as I could. So this is who I am and this is who I come from. Um, and so when I made that decision, it was so much easier because I could just put everything else into the background and focus on finishing and crafting one thing. And then, that came out. And then I decided, all right, I want to do my short story collection next because it's completely different than the poetry collection. It's a different tone. It's like my weird speculative fiction brain that is so much of who I am. And I was like, I feel like that voice needs to go out there next. And then after that, it will be my YA novel, like my thesis novel. And once I thought about it like that, my work and my life has been so much easier. So,
Wow.
yeah.
Well, you are on your way, Francine. I mean, you are a young person and young at heart, and yet you have so much rich experience about life and your understandings of yourself and the world around you. And I really respect that about you. And that's also why I was really enjoying our time in Banff and getting to know you, not only on in an artistic realm, but also just personally, and um, I can't wait to read your next book. I'm really looking forward to
Thank you.
it.
It's very different.
Well,
So,
when I think of you, I think of like that jar full of ideas. There's tons of ideas and there's tons of potential and there's tons of richness. And it's just, okay, what are we going to pull out today? And that's going to be what we do and finish it. Like
yeah,
you said, I think that's some really important advice to give aspiring writers or those who are writing and who maybe feel stuck is, or overwhelmed with, like you said, all those ideas. It's, you know what? Okay, let's just pick something, let's finish it, commit to that, and then we can move to the next
yeah.
thing. Okay, so I want to know,
Hmm.
I'm curious about the anthologies, Boobs, Women Explore What It Means to Have
Yeah.
Breasts. Tell me about that.
That was a great anthology. So that came out with Caitlin Press, who also put out my poetry book on me. And Caitlin Press is an amazing press in Vancouver Island. And so Boobs was an anthology. It was edited by my friend Ruth Daniel. And it's just a collection of women's voices and their experience with having breasts. So my story had to do with how when I was young, I developed rather large breasts very, very early. So in seventh grade, I was already a double D. And so you can imagine that was pretty difficult at the time when nobody else around me had that. And so I sort of had to deal with a lot of mocking, a lot of shame around that. A lot of adults, they were so like hurtful, because if I wore a t-shirt, it was automatically way more sexualized than if someone else did but I'm just a kid, right? Um, so my essay was sort of exploring what it was like to grow up with just yeah, being very developed at a very early age. And other stories in the collection deal with all sorts of things with breasts, not having breasts, like being born in a body that didn't have them, or um, getting reconstruction or having cancer. Like, it's a really cool collection. I would definitely suggest that anyone who's interested should definitely read it.
This concludes my conversation with Francine Cunningham. And remember to download part 2.